Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about Trump's tax returns, and the reason is because the New York Times is claiming that they have copies of Trump's tax returns, and he's only paid $750 in taxes. Now, before I go any further, let me mention, and I've done this in prior videos going back more than a year. Let me mention that prior to me becoming a full-time firearms instructor, I was a full-time accountant. Okay, my last position was a chief financial officer, and I've worked on both corporate tax returns and individual tax returns, and that's one of the reasons from time to time you'll see me make a business-related or economy-related video. So I have that type of background. So, with regards to these claims by the New York Times that they have Trump's tax returns, here's the thing with tax returns, right? Basically, everybody does their tax returns, or a corporation does its tax returns, and only the actual tax return that's signed and sent to the government, right, whether it be by mail or electronically, is the tax return. Okay, now in the process of getting to that point, it's very typical that we will do many draft tax returns, right, for discussion purposes. Just with a small business like a deli or a gas station or an ice cream truck, because typically, even if you have, like, let's say, an ice cream truck business, right? Usually, what we'll do is I'll make one corporation just to own the ice cream truck, and then I'll make another corporation for which the owner of that truck can run his revenue and expenses through that corporation. This way, we keep the equipment separate from the actual operation of the business. And then, of course, the owner would do his personal tax return, of which he'll pull certain elements, some, profits, losses, and, some of it may flow through into his personal tax return. And there's ways to control how much actually does flow through, or how much we actually hold back. There's rules that allow us to do that. Okay, so even with a small business like an ice cream truck or a hot dog stand or a little deli, you're already talking about 200 pages in tax returns, right? Because if you've got two corporate tax returns plus an individual tax return, you're talking about 200 pages in tax returns. So even a small tax return for a small-time business owner is pretty complicated. So if you got somebody like Trump, okay, I imagine that he's going to have, it's been said that over the course of his life, he's had at least 500 corporations, and some of them might have just been, holding companies, but, some of those may not be active, some of them may be dissolved, but I'm going to guess he's probably got at least a couple of hundred corporate and business tax returns that get done, and then bits and pieces of all of that flow into his personal tax return. So for the New York Times to say that they have his tax return, man, they must have a pretty big box of tax returns if they got all his information for any 1 year. Now, beyond that, right? The only thing that is an actual tax return is that which is actually sent, either mailed to the government, or electronically sent and electronically signed. Right? They have procedures for doing that. But that's the only actual tax return, that which is sent, signed to the government for filing. Okay. In the process of getting to that point, it's very typical to create numerous drafts. Okay. Which is basically drafts are a bunch of what-if scenarios, and the what-if scenarios can be pretty much anything. I mean, I've done drafts where, hey, we know that this person has some type of an illness. What if he becomes deceased this year? How would that affect his tax return? Or what if this person's parents become deceased and he, inherits, gets a big inheritance? That's also a what if scenario, a draft. Okay, so I can create, so when I'm preparing tax returns, I create different drafts based on different scenarios. Now, I will typically put all my tax returns on extensions, okay? Because I never actually file a tax return on April 15th for individuals, right? Corporations, they're due on March 15th. I never actually file it on those dates, what I do is I send in an automatic 6-month extension. So my corporate tax returns are due on September 15th, and the personal ones are due October 15th of each year. That's automatic. I mean, that's, I give myself that extra 6 months to file tax returns, and the reason is, especially like a year like now, like in 2020, there's always the possibility that things might happen this year, where they could pass some new law that affects the prior year. So I always keep the tax returns open for as long as possible, and delay that filing. Now, in that 6-month period, I will create numerous drafts, looking at what if scenarios. What if this, what if that. A lot of times during the course of that year, I still have to sometimes, the bank, for example, if the person has a loan from the bank, they will require the taxes. So what I will do is I will send the bank a draft. Okay, so that's not the actual tax return that's filed. That's a draft. That is, what we think is going to be the tax return. And the following month, I might update that draft. So if I'm trying to get a loan and I'm bidding it out to different banks, right? In April, I might send one draft out to one bank. The following month, I might send another draft out to another bank. 2 months later, I might be at a different point where we're doing different calculations. I might send a different draft out to a different bank. Okay. So these are all drafts. These are all what-if scenarios. For a typical small business, I will typically create about 6 drafts that usually end up in the garbage, just a whole bunch of what-if scenarios again. For a large corporation, something like on Trump's level, I would imagine that, there'd be a ton of these drafts floating around out there. The only thing that is the actual tax return is that which is mailed to the government and signed either by hand or electronically. That's the only thing that's the actual tax return, and the government cannot release it. So, so for example, when somebody says I've released my tax returns, all it means is that they've issued some paper and they are verbally telling you that, yeah, that is what I sent to the government. So if you have any other politician that does that, that's all they're doing. They're just saying that, yeah, this is what I sent to the government. There's no verification process, right? So if any other politician, let's say whether it's Schumer, Pelosi, McConnell, any of these politicians, when they say, yeah, we've released our tax returns, there's no verification process. No, nobody actually goes to the government and says, hey, government, this tax return that these people have released, is that actually what they sent you? None of that ever happens, okay? So anybody can release whatever they want. And especially with a complicated tax return, right? Because let's say, some tax returns are really simple. Like if your job, right, is you just work for a corporation, all you do is you get a W-2. Well, it's very simple. You just take the numbers off your W-2, you dump them into your taxes, and that's it. That's really simple. But if you are self-employed and you have multiple corporations that are all feeding your personal tax return, there's a lot of complications there. Again, your tax return ends up being hundreds of pages long. It's really easy for people to start picking that apart, because they can say, well, why'd you do this, or why'd you do that, or why'd you take this claim? So if I was Trump's advisor, or anybody in a similar situation, I would always advise them never release your tax returns, because there people who don't know anything are going to start picking it apart. Likewise, when you have, let's put it this way, the IRS pretty much, they estimate that of all the business tax returns that are sent in, 100% of them have some error. Okay, just because they're so big. When you're sending in a tax return that has hundreds and hundreds of pages, there is a 100% chance that there's going to be an error in there. I don't think I've ever done a tax return that is 100% correct. There's always going to be something wrong. It might be, an X missing in some box, or a decimal point missing, or whatever. Every tax return, every large business tax return that goes into the government is always wrong, 100%. Even if it's a minor error, there's always some error. It's just a complicated thing. So that's why Trump has not released his tax returns. It would be too easy for people just to pick it apart. Yes, he is using the excuse that he's under audit, and that's the reason why he's been advised not to release it. But the reason why he's been advised not to release it is because, hey, I mean, there's always going to be some error in the tax return, in a complicated tax return. So I just wanted to share this information with you guys. You know, given my background, I think, you know, I can shed some light on this. I mean, you have the New York Times saying that they have a copy of his tax return, but which tax return is this? Which draft is this? You know, is it, you know, because, you know, for somebody like Trump, I would probably have, you know, between the end of the year and the point that they're actually being mailed out, you know, I would probably have at least 20 or 30 different drafts that were, you know, that were printed out for the purpose of tax planning and discussion. So, they're my thoughts on that. If you're not a member of the channel, please subscribe. I'll see you guys next time.